day. Welcome to Music Motors and welcome to the 2021 Fiat Ducato. Now, unlike in previous generations, the newest generation is only powered by one powertrain. That's a 2.3 litre diesel. Now, that 2.3 litre diesel can come in a variety of power outputs, but this one is the power, which is 180 horsepower, 450 newton meters of torque because of the 9-speed auto that's matched to it. If you go for a manual, it's still 400 newton meters of torque, and realistically can return over 30 miles to the gallon quite easily. On top of that, it's then a 3.5 ton van that can take around about 1.3 ton of payload weight, which is pretty impressive, obviously depending on your spec, your trim level, amount of fuel that's in it, how much you and your passengers weigh, all that sort of good stuff. Really, though, quite impressive. Now, in a commercial segment, it's really important that a van can do all the really good van things. So in this episode of Music Motors, I'm going to put this to a commercial test. Find out if the Fiat Ducato still got it, because bearing in mind this still hasn't had, whilst it has had a bit of an update, it's not had as much of a radical update as things like a Sprinter or a Crafter. So stay tuned, and if you like this video, please click like, subscribe and comment your thoughts. So outside, obviously there's been a bit of a revision. It is actually quite a good looking van, let's be honest about it, but it obviously shares a lot with things like Peugeot and Citroen. So as a result, you know, the marketplace is full of vans which already kind of look like this. There's a reason why this is actually quite a long-lasting and well-built van. It's because it's not just Fiat that make it. Fiat make it, Fiat share it with Citroen and Peugeot. So as that result, you'll see a lot of them around with different badges on. But front end, quite nicely designed. Like the light cluster, this one's got cool daytime running lights. It's reasonably sharp, it's not too round. Obviously, previous iterations were really round on the front. Side profile, it is a little bit of a slab, let's be brutally honest, but they've done what they can to kind of make it a little more interesting. At the end of the day, this is a van that is made to take a lot of anything in the back, so it needs to be quite big, and as a result there's quite a big space for them to style. But I think they've done a pretty good job of making sure side profile isn't totally unengaged. Now, this one from a side profile point of view has actual alloys, and they're actually a very nice design. However, on initial thoughts, I was straight to the point of you can't have alloy wheels on a van, because especially with a long wheelbase like this, and this is an extra long wheelbase, what are the chances of you curbing them really quickly? And to be honest, quite slim, because there's a real good amount of tyre to alloy ratio. So as a result, they're actually pretty well protected from everything on the roads, from those obnoxious potholes that we get to curbs if you're doing anything in and around cities. But equally, it then means that the style's actually really quite nice. Back end is that we've seen over the last few years. It isn't too much of an update, but it is a nice refined finished back end. It is a good looking van from the back. Against others in its segment, maybe it's not quite there, it's not quite modern and fresh enough, but by no means is it a bad looking van. The whole exterior is actually quite a nice thing to look at, and it is a proper white van. Town economy, something which is pretty important to a van, let's be brutally honest, because sometimes you spend a lot of time around town. So what I'm going to do is a improvised multi-drop sort of thing. I suspect between 26 to 29 miles per gallon, because that would be keeping up with competitive vehicles in that same sort of driving cycle. So let's find out. So about 20 miles later, the average fuel economy was 28.2 to the gallon, which to be fair was very reasonable. The lock is pretty decent. Visibility, once you're adjusted to it, is very good. It's quite talky, it's quite responsive, and it's kind of exactly what you want from around town, from a van that is. Until you know the vehicle, obviously the blind spots are slightly different. This one's got reversing parking sensors and bits and pieces like that, because it's a higher trim level. If you don't have those, obviously it's just what you're used to. You do have to do a lot more steering input, and the steering is heavier than the competitors, but as around town fuel economy goes, that was kind of exactly what I was expecting. And it was a multitude of different driving styles, and it wasn't just short distance. Obviously, if you're doing, shall we say, Amazon-esque multi-drop where it's all on the same street and there's lots and lots and lots of stops, then it'll be lower than that. And obviously, if you're doing longer distance drops, it would be higher than that, but I think that was a good middle ground average, and it did a pretty decent job. Inside, I was actually quite surprised because there's a nice mix of new technology and old technology. I mean, the fact that, for instance, this power trim level has fully electric and heated mirrors, which includes that little mirror at the bottom to give you that slightly wider point of view and to be able to see your wheels when you're going around really tight corners. They're electric as well. It's got a reasonable sized touch display, which obviously isn't going to get any awards for its compatibility because it's a good unit, but it's been around for a while. You've seen it throughout the Fiat range. To the fact that you've got lane keep assist and automatic high beams. Really, the technology is actually quite good in this van, even though from the offset as you get into it, you may think it hasn't been updated too much. But whilst the actual design hasn't been updated massively, it's actually done a pretty good job of implementing technology into a platform that was already in there. And then you get those nice little bits like just here, this can pull down and you can have whatever amount of paperwork you need in there and a couple of extra cup holders. And then there's a tablet holder just in case you don't want to use their own inbuilt one and your company's got your own inbuilt system. For instance, if you're a multi-drop courier or whatever, there's a holder there to deal with that. And the inside is actually quite quiet. It does feel really well built. Whilst full of a lot of plastics, it's pretty decent. Now, while the seat isn't as comfortable as some competitors, it's not equally totally back-breaking, but the passenger seats leave quite a lot to be desired, but that's just kind of how it is when it comes to commercial vehicles. You know, it's kind of what I've come to accept. Interior audio quality is pretty good, and obviously that touchscreen unit has Apple CarPlay and all those good bits and pieces. Really, from this point of view, it's pretty good. Where it isn't so good is visibility, until you're used to it, that is. Obviously, this has a fair few blind spots, more so than competitor vehicles, but only competitor vehicles which cost, you know, £15,000 more. You have quite a lot of plastic going on here, obscuring your visibility here. The door ingress as you're coming forward is actually quite extensive, but that's only until you've just adjusted to it. As soon as you're used to what it is, you have no issues. And anyway, this has got a blind spot monitor just to make doubly sure you're sure what's going on. But once you're adjusted to it, it is actually really nice. It's a good seating position, nice to get in and out of, no jumping down. Quite a nice interior. Now that back area, this is an extra long wheelbase, so it can take quite a lot of stuff, but it's a 3.5 ton van, and it can take, depending, as I said earlier, on spec and stuff, you know, round about 1.3 ton of payload weight, which is just, it's pretty mega, to be brutally honest. I'm really, really impressed. There are a good amount of tie down spots, and really it's a very, very good size. It's not as tall as a Sprinter, but equally does a pretty good job. Sliding door isn't too heavy and is quite easy to get moving. Unfortunately, there isn't a side step on this one. If you were to build your own, make sure you get a side step, otherwise the jump is quite far. Not as far as something like a Transit, but it's still a little bit of a jump. Make sure you spec that in. Back end wise though, easy to jump in and out of. The doors are a good size, and it's just all you could really ask for from sticking stuff in the back. Okay, fuel economy, quite important for a commercial vehicle. Not the be all or end all, but you want to be able to know that it's able to achieve at least what the manufacturer says. So this is it's a bit of a back road and motorway and kind of a combined test. Manufacturers' claims don't always ring true, so that's why tests like this exist on channels like this. I'm putting this to the test, driving all sorts of different roads, picking something up, coming all the way back, telling you what it's like for the drive and the economy when I get back. So let's go. Okay, almost a couple of hours later, and quite surprisingly 37 miles to the gallon, which I know it was a lot of motorway, but it was also a lot of hills. It was a real combined drive, so pretty impressed by that. Power is more than acceptable. Obviously I sat between 50, 60, 40, 30, never did actual motorway speeds, but that was pretty impressive, to be fair. It's actually quite comfortable in here. It isn't very noisy, even though there wasn't anything in the back, and it is a panel van. That was more than acceptable. The ride height is actually, it's not what I'm used to. I'm used to a lower ride height in vans, and it was actually quite nice to be up a little bit higher. The seat adjustment is actually pretty comprehensive, and the Uconnect system with that audio system, and the audio on the inside pretty decent, to be fair, considering this is a van. From a joint point of view, from a real usage of this van,
it's done pretty well, and that fuel economy was very surprising.
Now performance, this one's called a Power, which is 180 horsepower, and because it's got that 9-speed auto, 450 newton meters of torque, and genuinely, and I cannot express this enough, it's actually surprisingly quick for a van. Now, I don't have a 0 to 60 timer or top speed because what I've noticed with commercials, that sort of thing doesn't tend to exist. But you're looking at sub 10 seconds to 62 miles an hour, which for a panel van is very impressive. And that torque means that you can have a lot of weight in there before you actually start feeling any lack of said power. Now the steering is quite heavy, which is a good thing and a bad thing. On the motorway, it's a lovely thing because you actually get a good amount of feedback. On back roads, you get a fair amount of feedback, but around town, sometimes it feels a little bit heavier. You know, maybe it could do with a little bit more input from the power assist, as it were. Steering wheel is actually quite big, so on those longer runs, it is very comfortable to sit and place your hands a little bit like a truck driver, chauffeur as you want, or a bad man. Really, then the only extra bit to put on top of that is the fact that sometimes you have to put a little bit more lock in than you're expecting, but equally the lock is then actually quite reasonable. Fiat claim that you're going to see about 30 to 31 miles per gallon combined, and that is absolutely achievable. If you're very lucky, you'll see 40 to the gallon. If you're very unlucky, you'll see 26 to the gallon. That's not combined, that's just generally. Now that 9-speed auto is actually very responsive. The throttle's very responsive and the brakes actually have a very good feel. The 9-speed auto means that at 60, 65 miles an hour, you're sat at about 1500 RPM, which as a result means the cab's very quiet and the frugality is very good. Really, drivability wise then, this is actually quite impressive. Whilst it's not as nimble as some competitive vehicles, for its cost it's more than acceptable. And when it comes to the fact that you can get good fuel economy, have that little bit of fun, it looks pretty decent, and you can do everything you could possibly need during the week, is very impressive. All I would really want from it is slightly more comfortable seats. I'd like the visibility to be ever so slightly better, and the interior really could do with a little bit of an update. Now, but that's not to say it's not coming, it's just to say that as it stands, against some competitive vehicles, it does feel a little bit behind the times, but not terribly. The technology is here, it's just not as sleek and streamlined as some others in the segment. Generally though, really, really good feeling van. Cost wise, realistically you're looking at about anywhere between like 25 to 27 plus VAT for a base spec van. Though that said, I have actually managed to find a few deals at a 19 plus VAT, and anything from about £400 a month onwards. If you go for a van like this, you're probably looking more about 37 plus VAT, being a Power and having a few options on it. This isn't a van that you'll be let down to own, and it will do everything that you want a van to do. It is a man's van, it's a van's van, there's no airs or graces about it, it is what it is, and it does it very well. So, Fiat, good job. Those slight bits I'd like change, but that's just for me, and that's only because I'm used to driving cars. From a van's point of view, I think they've done a very, very good job.